Hello everybody. You join me this week from a location in the north of France that I can only describe as car heaven. I've been invited here by one of my subscribers, Pierre Alexis, to basically play with his family's amazing car collection. And I'm really thankful to you and your family for bringing me here. Of course, I'm going to do my very best with the 3 days that I have to produce as much amazing and unusual content for you guys as I possibly can. And given the fact that I am in France, I thought that the natural thing to start with would be this. It's the BMW Z1. Now, granted, it's not the most French of cars, but I think it is something that you will all enjoy learning a bit more about. Now, the Z1 is one of those cars, and there are a few of them, where an awful lot of effort went into making the entire thing, but it seems to be remembered for one sole thing. That happens to quite a few cars. I mean, let's be honest, how many people know the McLaren F1 simply for its 241-mile-an-hour record or its 3-seat layout, and they forget all the other amazing things that went into it? Or for how many people is the Lotus Esprit just that one that went underwater in the James Bond movie? Well, I think similarly, for most people, if they even know what a Z1 is, they'll just say, oh yeah, isn't that the car with the doors that do this? Go on, admit it. That's pretty much all anybody remembers about the Z1. That's assuming you even knew that it did that. Now, as party tricks go, that's pretty impressive, but the truth is the Z1 is so much more than a pair of very trick doors. In fact, in the 1980s, this was one of the most important cars BMW were working on. Here's why. The clue is all in the name. The Z in this case stands for Zukunft, the German word for future. This car started life as a pure concept car. It was thought up in the mid-80s as a way of essentially showcasing many different technologies BMW were working on. Chief among those were the multi-link rear axle suspension setup and a lot of work with regards to composite panels. The entire car is clad in plastic. Now, the car was so well received that BMW actually decided to make some as a small production run. They were available from the factory exclusively in left-hand drive, with the vast majority of them going to German customers. The original planned run was only 4,000 cars, and this then became 8,000 when demand increased. Unfortunately, they had to stop production at around 8,000 because the molds that they'd used were designed only for a short production run. And after making enough body panels for about 8,000 cars, the molds were no good anymore and they simply had to be discarded. To keep going on and make new molds would have simply been far too costly. And that's one of the other cool and completely forgotten features about the Z1. You can remove all of the body panels from this car. BMW claim you can do it in about an hour. Owners claim you can do it in about a day. In fact, when you bought these cars, one of the options was to have a complete set of new body panels in a colour of your choosing, or you could of course have them sprayed any colour you'd like, and the idea was that when you got bored of your car's colour, you simply changed it. Well, a few manufacturers have tried that, both before and after. It never really works, but it was interesting to see BMW being quite creative at the time. Once you step over the very large sill, you're greeted by one of the most unusual interiors I've seen on a BMW. Now, it's a mixture of parts from the E30 parts bin and some bespoke Z1 stuff. Of greatest interest is these seats, which are very form-hugging and clad in mostly a suede type material. Now, they don't look particularly pleasing to my eye, but they are very comfortable. Now, in terms of engine and gearbox, there was only one choice available. That's possibly the most conventional part of the entire car. It was the 2.5 litre straight 6 from the E30 325i, paired to the standard 5-speed manual gearbox. As with my E34 5 Series and many other cars of the period, this car's bonnet is hinged at the front and reveals a very tidy and quite old school engine bay. Now, there's nothing special about the motor. It produces just over 160 in both horsepower and pounds-feet of torque. Now, despite the fact that BMW are usually very Germanic and predictable with what they do, the Z series has never ever really found its footing. This car, of course, was the first, and it was never intended to be productionized, and so you can really see it as something of a one-off. The Z3, of course, was always intended for mass production, and that was essentially a more premium version of the Mazda MX-5 with things like a better interior and that lovely BMW 6-cylinder engine alongside the regular 4-cylinder options. And then you had the Z4, which was a slightly more modern take, sharpened up, made a little bit stiffer, a little bit sportier, a little bit edgier, and it was BMW's attempt at trying to take away some of Porsche's market share that they then gained with their Boxster model. And that never really worked, even with the Z4M. It just never seemed to get the response that BMW wanted. You can see that they then changed their mind because the second generation Z4 went for a totally different crowd. It was a larger, heavier, softer car with that hard-top roof and a really different demeanour. It was going after the Mercedes SLK buyer. You can't, of course, forget the ZA, which was also a bonkers, very, very expensive car that was intended simply as BMW's take on a retro muscle car. That was another vehicle that, when it came out, completely confused journalists because they had no idea what BMW was actually trying to make. Even in this family of misfits, though, the Z1 really does stand out. There's a few reasons for that. First off, the production numbers. ZA aside, they made very, very few of these. 8,000 originally built. How many still remaining is anybody's guess. Now, another reason for the car not being sold in great numbers was the asking price. When this was new, circa 1990, it cost, in France, 365,000 francs. That's around 80% the price of a brand new Porsche 911. Rivals at the time might have included things like Lotus's then new Elan M100. That was 280,000 francs. To give you some context, a Renault Clio, also a new car at the time, would have cost you about 53,000. In other words, you'd have had enough money to buy 7 Clios to have one of these. They were not cheap cars. And they were never officially exported to America. But thanks to the new rules over there and the fact that this car is now over 25 years old, they are beginning to find their way across the Atlantic. And that, of course, means that prices are on the rise. Now, a quick check on eBay would tell me that a good example like this, with reasonable miles, is worth in excess of £40,000. And now I've talked about it, I'm going to find out what BMW's idea of the future was like 25 years later. As you can probably notice, on a day like today, one of the great things about this car is you can drive it around with the doors down, which somehow is not anywhere near as terrifying as doing the same thing in a Caterham, because you still have an Elise-like sill protecting you here. Now, at the current time, I'm sure about half my viewers will be going, oh good, he's on the correct side of the car for once. Well, as you know, for me, this is not the correct side of the car. This is very much the wrong side of the car. And it does mean that my gear shifting is not as good as it normally is. Being English, of course, I've grown up with stick, as the Americans would say, but it's over here somewhere normally. Of all the cars I'm going to drive this week, there's a very particular and honest and simple reason that I've chosen this one to begin with. That's because it's the one which bears the most resemblance to vehicles with which I'm already familiar. That is to say, certainly around town, it just drives like a normal car. The engine's perfectly tractable. It sounds beautiful. Now, the original exhaust rotted away, so it was replaced with something which was of a very similar design but not identical. The main change being the fact that it now has a twin exit at the rear rather than a single, and it's stainless steel. So this should hopefully last the lifetime of the car. Just driving it around at these speeds, it's incredibly pleasant. I can certainly see the appeal. It's very different because of those doors, but it's also very easy, very friendly, very approachable. I mean, that's obvious really. Any car circa post, let's say about 1985, anyone who's never driven an old car can get in and go. As long as they don't have a choke to deal with, there's usually not a problem. This is a real delight. Oh, in case you're wondering, the doors are simply activated by pulling a door handle, which is perhaps a little disappointing. They've made it a handle into a switch. It does look a little bit hasty and a little bit tacked on for a car that was so expensive. You can, of course, operate the window independently, electric naturally. Now, if the car's battery packs up, there is a way of getting things sorted, which generally involves sending a small person into the boot. The clutch is very easy, and I have to say, having had quite a few experience of cars from the mark, if you blindfolded me and asked me to tell you what this car was, I could easily tell you that this was a BMW. Feels very, very familiar to me. I'd say most familiar to me compared with my E34. There's very good reason for that. They come from pretty much the same era. My E34 was a 1995 car, but was very much last of line. I know it probably doesn't look that bright and sunny on camera, but trust me, it is. And so I'm going to drop that door again just so I can enjoy this beautiful weather. Sorry about the added wind noise that it may bring, but I think it'd be a waste to have an opportunity to drive something like this and not do it. Let's face it, you would, wouldn't you? Now, all of the controls fall very naturally to hand. I'm heading out now to a road which has a few corners on it, which hopefully should really demonstrate the benefits, if it worked, of that multi-link rear axle setup. Now, for the time, that was quite an advanced setup. It then went into the E36 saloon. It did not make it into the Z3, which still used the trailing arm setup from the E30, as did the E36 Compact. And this is also the same basic design as used in the Rover 75. This is just nice. I drive so many different cars of many different performance levels, and yeah, going fast is great, but sometimes I love cars that put a smile on my face with not much speed involved, and this is one. That being said, you all want to know how it goes, so let's find out. The answer with the doors down is briskly enough. It's not particularly quick. Yes, it's 160 something horsepower. I think I'm going to have to put that door up now. Bye-bye. The car doesn't weigh too much thanks to that plastic construction. Oh, it does handle nice though. Now we have a motorcyclist behind us, so I'll let pass, but oh, it's really nice through these corners. grips nicely. So good balance of handling and ride comfort, I would say. Oh, I love this car. Ah, that door's coming down. I love it too much like this. The engine's beautifully responsive. It's a proper old school BMW engine. Simple 5-speed box. The action is okay. Not the best, not the worst BMW box I've ever used, but it does the job well enough. All the other controls are pleasant. Brake feel, again, not the strongest, but very predictable, very easy to modulate. Steering, pretty muted, not a huge amount of feedback from that. Very typical BMW really in that regard. Now, bearing in mind that I drove up here in the Evora to then get into a car with visibility like this, or turning circles not too bad. Yeah, to get into a car with decent visibility is a joy. Oh, it sounds delicious. It doesn't sound like any BMW that I've driven. It sounds distinctly different to my E46 330. Of course, it's different from my M3. My 5 Series was a V8, so that of course is no comparison. Car feels a very pleasant size, feels quite small in here. Storage in the back isn't brilliant, to be perfectly honest. But otherwise, this car's a delight. So who should buy this? Well, it's a difficult one because if you've got £40,000 to spend, there's a lot of cars you could buy. You could buy an Aston Martin V8 Vantage. I'm pretty sure 40 grand to get you a convertible one too, if that's your bag. You could also get any Z4 you like. You couldn't get a Z8. You could get any Boxster you want, for sure. It's not the best car for road trips because it is somewhat compromised on the storage space. But I'd say it's the sort of car for someone who prides himself on doing things a little bit differently. And that seems to be the MO of the family that I'm with, and I think you'll get that when you see the other cars that are in their collection. Yeah, there's no real feel through this wheel, but it does exactly what I tell it to. Well, I'm really going to fall in love with this set of corners over the next few days, I know that. I think I'm going to have to come here with the Evora, which could possibly get me in some trouble. If you want a car for investment, I'm not sure this is necessarily a great car to buy, because now they're already heading to the USA. I think you may have already missed the boat on that one. But ultimately, if you're a fan of German cars and you want something that is truly different, but you can still use and treat like a modern car, you could daily this if you wanted to. This one's only got 37,000 kilometers on it. So I'm incredibly grateful to Pierre Alexis for letting me drive his prized possession. I know that finding one of these is something he's wanted to do for a very long time, and he's very, very proud of this car, and rightly so. So yeah, I think this is a car for the different people. And that's absolutely fine. I've been giving a lot of thought recently to what actually it is that I want to feature on the channel, what I want to champion. And of course I want to do a great variety of things. Old, new, cheap, expensive, etc. But more than anything, I love promoting anything that's a bit different. And if this car's anything, it's that. And I suppose A BMW that's really something different? We should celebrate that. It took over 2 decades before they really tried something boldly strange again with the i8. I hope they don't wait as long to do it again. Thanks for watching, everybody. Please comment, like, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me what you think. Which Z car would you take home if you had the choice? This, the 3, one of the 4s, or maybe the 8? Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.